On September 9th of the 9 AD year, a full day after leaving the well-protected and well-supplied path which led back to winter camp at the Rhine River, Publius Quinctilius Varus led the 17th, 18th and 19th legions through the narrowing pathways of the Teutoburg Forest. Reports of a rebellion within the Angrivarii territory had drawn Varus off course, a deception neatly orchestrated by Arminius, Varus's chief advisor and commander of the Cherusci auxiliary forces. But Arminius had his own plans. Secretly allying with a coalition of Germanic tribes, Arminius prepared a devastating ambush for the Romans. On September 7th, the day before Varus broke camp and began his march, Arminius took his leave to muster the Cherusci auxiliary legions under his command. Varus expected Arminius to return with his forces by around the 10th. But Arminius was already laying in wait. Hidden deep within the forest, he and his coalition of Germanic tribes prepared for the ambush they had discreetly organized over the summer months. As Varus and his legions trudged through the dense woods, unaware of the impending danger, Arminius and his men readied themselves. The stage was set. Slogging through the forest's narrow pathways, Varus's military train became stretched out and thin, reaching approximately 19 miles in length as it snaked its way through the dense and overgrown woodland. Fallen timber and overgrown foliage obstructed passageways and had to be cleared, slowing their progress. A continual drizzle gradually dampened Varus's legions, making their clothing, shields, and other equipment heavier to carry by the hour. The weather, combined with the increasingly difficult terrain, sapped the strength and morale of Varus's men, leaving them vulnerable. Irritable and cursing the weather, the legions began to ignore discipline and to disregard a tactical awareness of their surroundings. Stretched and thin, Varus's legions found themselves on low ground, wedged in a narrow pathway that traversed between two large hills, rising on either side of the military train. From somewhere above came the blast of a single horn. Then the sound of savage screeching echoed through the forests as arrows and spears rained down on Varus's unprepared men. Within the first few minutes of the attack, Varus suffered heavy losses as the surprised soldiers, with no time to respond, immediately fell under the initial onslaught of missiles. Despite their slow start, the Roman men rallied around their centurions and quickly found their discipline. As the Germanic warriors rushed down the hill to engage the surprised Romans, the legions formed defensive walls facing each side and struggled to hold back the waves of fierce Germanic attackers. The relentless assault and the challenging terrain tested the Romans' resolve and endurance. Finally, unable to break the Roman lines, the Germanic warriors withdrew, retreating back up the hills and disappearing into the dark and misty forest. Among Varus's legions, the dead and wounded lay scattered along the path, the moaning of agony from man and beast alike filling the air. Several of Varus's baggage trains, which carried food and other supplies for the legions, were destroyed, overturned, and scorched. Gathering up his wounded and what supplies could be salvaged, Varus marched his legions forward until he found a clearing. There he ordered the building of a fortified camp, hoping to regroup and prepare for the challenges that lay ahead. That night, Varus held a war council with his military advisors to discuss their options. After listening to their advice, Varus decided to steal a march on the Germanic warriors. Leaving behind their wounded and all unnecessary baggage, what remained of Varus's legions crept out of their fortified camp before the sun rose. Under the cover of darkness and moving as silently as possible, they distanced themselves from the site of the ambush, hoping to evade further attacks and make their way back to the safety of the Roman forts along the Rhine River. After a full day's march which had begun in the darkness, Varus finally came upon a wide clearing. There he ordered another fortified camp to be built. Taking cover behind the safety of the walls, Varus waited for the attack he was sure would come. However, the Germanic warriors, under the leadership of Arminius, understood the difficulty of defeating entrenched Romans and did not launch an attack. Nonetheless, with supplies running short and the risk of foraging too dangerous, Varus had no choice but to break camp after a night's uneasy rest. Forced to leave the safety of the clearing, Varus led his legions further north, compelled to re-enter the thick and dense Teutoburg Forest. Once again the Germanic warriors launched missile attacks. Although Varus's legions were better prepared for the second attack, the arrows and spears seemed to come from every direction at once, making it impossible for them to discern the source of the attacks. Suffering further losses, Varus was forced to retreat and take cover in yet another fortified camp. As Varus and his men endured another uneasy night's sleep, the next day brought a terrible storm. The drizzle that had persisted for 2 days turned into a torrential downpour, accompanied by dangerously high-gusting winds. Throughout the length of the storm, which lasted most of the day, Varus kept his men safely behind the fortified walls, likely contemplating his situation and the betrayal of Arminius. However, the Germanic tribes seized the opportunity presented by the rain to disguise their movements. As the Romans sheltered behind their walls, more and more warriors braved the elements, with large numbers arriving as reinforcements. Discreetly positioning themselves in the forest on both sides of the pathway the Romans would need to travel, the Germanic tribes waited. With no sign of the enemy in sight, Varus broke camp and entered again into the forest, continuing his northward progress. Eventually, the winding pathway led the Roman legions between a large hill and a swamp, another perfect location for an ambush. When Varus saw the earthenworks wall of fallen timber and branches designed to funnel the Roman forces into an even thinner train, he knew he had led his men right into Arminius's trap. The attack came swiftly. From behind the makeshift walls of earth and branches, the Germanic tribesmen launched an endless barrage of missiles at the Romans, who were better prepared for the ambush and had formed up ranks to create lines of defence. As half of Varus's legions constructed an encampment, the defensive lines continued to take a beating. Finally, determined not to wait for an arrow or spear to claim their lives, several cohorts rushed the earthenworks walls and launched a brutal offensive against the tribesmen. Although the legions failed to destroy the walls, they killed many Germanic warriors before they were forced to retake their defensive positions alongside their fellow soldiers. With further losses and the injured screaming in pain in the mud, the Germanic tribes ceased their missile attacks and finally charged. As the Germanic warriors clashed with the Romans, whose clothing was soaked and whose shields and weapons were too heavy to hold, Varus fought at the front lines. During the bloodshed, Varus was pierced with a lance. He was quickly evacuated from the front lines and taken to the safety of the newly built encampment. However, from atop the southern hill opposite the swamp, Germanic reinforcements appeared. Roaring guttural cries of battle, they descended the hill in a swarm and surrounded the encampment. Some of Varus's cavalry, giving up all hope, abandoned their dying comrades in arms. Mounting horses, they charged east and into the darkness of the Teutoburg. but they did not make it far. Joining the deserters was Numonius Vala, one of Varus's legates, who was cut down by the pursuing Germanic horsemen alongside the fleeing cavalry. In the midst of the chaos and carnage, realizing the depth of his defeat and the betrayal of one he had trusted, Publius Quinctilius Varus faced a stark and bitter reality. With no hope of victory and fearing the dishonor of capture, Varus chose the only remaining course available to him as a Roman commander. He fell upon his sword, ending his life even as his disintegrating legions were massacred in a frenzied bloodbath of Germanic vengeance. As the last survivors of the Battle of Teutoburg Forest surrendered and faced capture by the victorious Germanic warriors, the battlefield bore witness to scenes of devastation and plunder. Thousands of Roman soldiers lay dead among the carnage, along with slaughtered horses and beasts of burden. Amidst this grim aftermath, Arminius, now a triumphant leader, directed one final act of defiance against the authority of Rome. Ordering the decapitation of Publius Quinctilius Varus, his one-time commanding officer, Arminius sent Varus's head as a grisly gift to King Maroboduus of the Marcomanni tribe, a gruesome invitation to join forces with Arminius, the man who had just shown the world that Rome was not invincible.